Welcome back to another episode of Stories from the Workbench. I'm Pastor Dave Carl, and this is my shop of wonders. Today, I'd like to introduce you to an old friend of mine. This is my miter saw. Bum, bum, bum! More formally known as a dual bevel sliding miter saw. As you can see, it swings down to, well, saw. But wait, there's more. This saw is a sliding saw. It comes out on this arm so it can cut a board over 12 inches wide. Now without this sliding arm, it could only cut the width of the blade. Now you might be asking, why have a miter saw when you already have a table saw? Well, if I needed to cut a 10-foot board in half, it'd be very difficult to safely move the board on the table saw. On the miter saw, the board stays still and the blade moves. Very safe, very smart. Almost every day that I'm working in the shop, I use the miter saw. Another rather boring tool that I use in the shop every day is the amazing shop vac. A wood shop creates tons of dust and chips and mess. I don't mind sweeping, but I love to vacuum stuff up. I have small shop vacs like this connected to a few of my tools. On a few, like this one, I've got a special switch. When I turn on the miter saw, it turns on the vac automatically. And when I turn off the miter saw, the shop vac keeps going for 3 seconds to clear the hose. What kind of alchemy is this? I've got bigger vacuums on the bigger tools. When they're this big, we call them dust collectors. Mostly just out of respect. And this shop vac I use mostly for cleaning up the floor and my workbench. Ooh, it's so sucky. And now a very fun and very low-tech tool, the fro. I know. It looks a lot like a Klingon weapon, huh? When you're going to make a chair, like this for instance, you don't get lumber from the lumber yard and saw it. You get wood from a log and you split it. You need the grain to go all the way through a part like this, because when you sit in it, the parts move, they bend. And if the grain was coming at an angle and you sat in this, it would snap right at that spot. So the only way to get, the best way to get the grain going all the way through is you split a log, and then you split that half log, and then you split that quarter log, and right around that quarter log, that's when the fro comes into play. You start with a log, and you split the log with wedges and sledges. Now, when you get the pieces down into a manageable size, and you'll want to split them into these size of a billet, you need to use a different tool. Now, you could try to swing an axe and hope you hit the line, but that's awfully hard. But on the fro, you can place the blade on the line that you want to split, and use a club that you could have made, well, on your lathe. So with the fro, I can completely control the split. And if this wood was green like you would like, it splits even better. I made this froe on my dad's forge and anvil. The metal is from an old car leaf spring. And so free metal, a little bit of blacksmithing work, free froe. Ooh, that's fun to say. Free froe. Free froe. Now, admittedly, like other things I've made on the forge, it's not very pretty, but it works all day long. You ready for a Bible story? We have a great one for you today. Today's story, God and Gideon. Back in the time of the Old Testament, Gideon was a youngest son of the smallest tribe. Kind of the last guy who was going to get picked for the basketball game. Well, God picked him for the big game. I'm getting too excited and I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's back up a little bit and set up the scene a bit first. In the days of Gideon, there was not a king over Israel. Before the kings, there were judges. And the judges, well, they acted very much like prophets. Well, Israel had been worshiping Baal. Here we go again with Baal. God said the people would be punished if they didn't stop worshiping these idols. Well, they wouldn't stop. And boy, did they get punished. The Midianites were a nearby tribe who worshipped... Eve, you're in the wrong story. Who worshipped Baal. And they certainly did not care about the God of the Israelites. God used the Midianites to, well, spank Israel for 7 years. When the nation of Israel grew crops, the Midianites came and stole it or burned it. There were no crops, there were no livestock left. The Midianites, they didn't leave anything behind. It was really bad. Israel had suffered under the Midianites for 7 years, and finally they cried out to God for rescue. God chose Gideon to be the rescuer, and God sent Gideon an angel. What? The angel showed up to this youngest guy from the smallest tribe. God chose this guy.
The Lord is with you, valiant warrior.
What? Who are you talking to? What? Are you talking to me? Hey, if you're an angel, why is God doing all of this? This is really bad.
Yes, it is. Go and rescue Israel from Midian. God has chosen you to do it.
Gideon coughed up a chicken bone, kind of. What are you kidding? I'm not your guy. I'm a nobody. I am certainly not a valiant warrior.
The Lord will be with you. He will win the battle. You just need to show up.
I need to tell you, things were really bad in Israel. Not only were the Midianites worshiping Baal, the people of Israel were worshiping Baal. Ugh.
And now our special segment, Point Counterpoint.
Welcome to our segment, Point Counterpoint. I am here representing the side of God. And I'm representing the side of the Israelites who were worshiping Baal. All right, why on earth would the people of God be worshiping Baal? Well, because if we didn't, the Midianites would attack us and burn our homes and send us off, Mr. Grumpy Pants. But the trouble is being caused because you were worshiping idols. Well, I think you're mean, and I think your tools all have rust. Well, that's just hurtful. There's no talking to you when you're like this. Look, when times are tough, you move toward God, not away from him. Gideon's own father built an altar to Baal on his own land. What? Along with Baal, they worshipped Asherah. Now, Asherah and Baal, they were kind of like idol buddies. They hung out together. It's crazy. We finish each other's sandwiches. What? That's what I was going to say. So they kind of went along together. Israel felt like their biggest problem were the Midianites. Well, we often do this. We often think the problem that we see in front of us is the problem. But often, the real problem is something we don't yet see. So when you're in real trouble, stop and pray that God would show you what the real problem is. It is usually a spiritual issue that needs to be dealt with first. The real problem was they were not loving and worshiping God. God wanted to address the real problem. So he sent Gideon on a task that was going to ruffle a lot of feathers. That night, the angel of the Lord came to Gideon in a dream and told him,
Go up to the hill to the altar of Baal your father built. Tear down the altar of Baal completely and rebuild the altar of God there. Take your father's bull and prepare it to be sacrificed.
Well, since you need wood to burn the meat on the altar, Gideon cut down that idol pole and turned it into firewood. Then he made a sacrifice to God on that hill. Gideon knew this was going to cause trouble. The people of Israel who were worshiping Baal, he knew they were going to be angry. But they would also be afraid that the Midianites were going to be angry and come and do more damage than they've already done. They were right. The Midianites were furious. They called out their entire army to come and wipe out Israel. There were so many of them, they could not be counted. God was ready for battle. Understandably, Gideon was a little nervous. Oh God, this is really big. I need to know that you are really with us. If you are with us, let this sheep rug be wet in the morning and the ground around it to be dry, and then we'll know. In the morning, the sheepskin was absolutely soaked with water. When they wrung it out, water just poured out and poured out and poured out. That was a lot of water. Thanks, God, for that. How about tomorrow? What if the ground is wet and the rug is dry? Sorry, but I'm really nervous. You guessed it. The rug was bone dry and the ground was soaked. Whoops, whoops, I'm slipping on the wet ground. Whoops, whoops, thanks, God. Whoops. Gideon called out all the men in Israel who could fight. And they came, more than 30,000 of them. Not as many as the Midianites had. The Midianite army looked like this. The army of Israel looked like this. Understandably, Gideon and his men were nervous.
We are totally outnumbered. This was a terrible idea. Maybe if we said sorry, they would not attack.
What was that?
My tummy. It rumbles when I get scared. Guess what? I'm really scared.
We will not say sorry. They are a plague to us, brought on by our disobeying God and giving our love and loyalty to idols. Gideon, God said we would win, right? He did. I'm just not sure how. So God spoke to Gideon.
Gideon, you have too many fighting men. When you win the battle, you'll all believe you did this, and you'll move away from me again. Tell all of the men who do not really want to fight that they can go home.
So when the announcement was made, a ton of guys went home. Okay, I'm going home. If you think my tummy is bad now, it gets worse. You do not want to know what happens. See you after the battle. 20,000 men went home, leaving only about 10,000 to fight. So now the army of Israel got split down to something like this.
Okay, we are toast. Burnt toast. No butter, no jelly, just burnt toast. We can never win now.
I've heard a sentence that a lot of folks think is true, but it really is not. They say God will never give you more than you can handle. Usually they're saying this to someone else. This is categorically wrong. God routinely, often gives us more than we can handle. That is when we look to Him best, because we cannot do anything on our own that'll even matter. Times of trouble are when we pay attention to God best. We, believers in God, are supposed to routinely be overwhelmed. Ooh, God just told me something.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, because this is a mess. We need to get all those guys back. Sorry.
God says we have too many men.
Oh, that's just great.
God told Gideon to have all the men go down to the stream and get a drink of water. They all did. A bunch of them, most of them, laid down on the bank of the stream and sucked up water with their mouth. A few of them scooped up water with their hands, like a cup. So Gideon told all the lay down and drink guys they could go home. And the scoop it up in your hand like a cup guys, there were 300 of them. Gideon told them to stay, which made the army of Israel about 302. So now the army of Israel got split down to something like this.
This is impossible. The only way out of this is a miracle.
Fortunately, our God, the God of the Bible, He is a God of miracles.
Unless we have a miracle, we are going to be toast. Not burnt toast, briquettes. We are charcoal, just little pieces of red hot charcoal.
So about midnight, Gideon and the 300 men got into 3 separate positions around the ginormous army of the Midianites. Gideon blew his horn, and he broke the clay pot that he brought. Then all 300 men did the same, and they held up torches and shouted, "A sword for the Lord and Gideon!" The Midian army was confused and scared, and they jumped up, they grabbed their own swords, and they started attacking each other. The army of Israel showed up to a sword fight with ram's horns, clay jars, and torches. Oh yeah, and God. The Midianites were totally defeated that day. The nation of Israel was once again reminded of God's goodness and power. Sadly, the nation of Israel would need more reminders in the future. But then again, so do we. Let's learn from this story and from Israel. Let's decide today that we will serve the Lord and nothing else. And the next time you're scared or overwhelmed, think spiritually and pray that God will show you what you really need to see. That's our story for today. You can read more about God and Gideon in the book of Judges, chapters 6 and 7. Thanks for being with me, and we'll see you again next time.